Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Matt and I'm back with another video. Got kind of an interesting one for you today. I wanted to show you my very first weathering job I did on a rail car. Yes, I finally weathered some of my cars up. I have never weathered a rail car before, and the reason for that is that I've just been afraid of screwing it up. And so I've just never done it. I've purchased all the materials in order to do that with it, and I've just been too afraid of ruining a car, and so I put it off for far too long. And now that I've finally done it, I can see the light. I should have done this a long time ago because it turned out great, and it wasn't as hard as I was expecting it to be. So today I wanted to show you the steps I went through in weathering this particular car here. This is not intended to be a tutorial video. This is really more of an inspiration video, just to kind of show you my experiences doing it for the first time. I'm not an expert at weathering at all, so don't take my techniques as like this is how to do it. There are plenty of other YouTubers online who have done it far more than me, who have much better techniques and can walk you through the process. Please watch their videos for that. This video is really just a bit of an inspiration if you are somebody like me who has put it off for too long. So my very first weathering job, I knew I wanted to do a couple things. I knew I wanted to use a cheap car. So this is a cheap Athearn, ready to roll. I think I purchased it for about $15, a bunch of years ago. And molded in grab irons. This isn't a high quality model by any standards, but as you can see, give it a very interesting weathering job and it becomes a very lovely model. So don't be afraid of picking up these cheap cars, and don't be afraid of adding them to your layout, because they look fantastic once you weather them up. They look really, really great. So yeah, once I had this car sort of chosen as the car I wanted to weather, another thing I wanted to do was pick a car that I knew I was going to very heavily weather, because I knew that it was going to be much easier for me to do too much weathering than to do just the right amount of, do a light weathering job. It's much easier to go too far than it is to, find that spot where it's like, oh, this is perfect. This is just the right amount of weathering and not any, not too much more than that. So I love heavily weathered, nasty old box cars. So I knew that for my very first attempt, something like this was going to be the perfect way to do it. I found some photo reference online. Everyone should be doing this when they are weathering their cars. And you can see this is very heavily rusted and pitted. You can see on your photo reference where rust tends to collect and this kind of thing here. You see this has a lot of graffiti that was sprayed on, and it's kind of getting washed off and looking just old and nasty and beautiful. So with this in hand, I went to work kind of weathering up the car. Let's see. First steps were to actually add a little bit of anti-shine varnish. This is a spray paint or spray varnish by Army Painter. Anti-shine matte varnish, normally used for Army tabletop gaming models like Warhammer, that kind of thing. I like it a lot. I think it gives a nice coating, so I use it on my models as well. That gives it a little bit of tooth so that everything can kind of stick to it. Then added some weathering powders, rusty brown and dirty white, applied with a soft bristle makeup brush that I got from the dollar store. Now the rusty brown went on very, very well. The dirty white did not. It just didn't stick to the model. I don't know what was going on. It's a little coarser than the rusty brown is, so I don't know if I need to crush this up a little bit more or what, but it just didn't stick. So I meant to sort of fade the car with this. Didn't end up working. I don't know. I'll look into it to see what was going on with that, but that not super successful. But once that sort of initial pass of kind of dusty, dirty brown was on the car, you can kind of see it on the trucks there on the bottom half. And I went in and started adding these kind of rusty pits all over the car. And what I used for that was actually used two colors. This is a Vallejo model color burnt umber for the dark, and then I went over it with this much redder saddle brown. And this is a pretty reddish brown. This might be a little, I would be very, just go over it very sparingly with this color, because it is a very reddish brown. On an orange car like this, I think it works well, but if you were to put it on like a lighter car or a black car, that might end up being a little too red. I don't know. But with a very thin, very small brush, I kind of went over in areas where the doors might rub on the car itself, add some rust to the doors. Kind of went kind of hog wild on the rust, tapped off a lot of it, removed a lot of the color from the brush, and then kind of tapped over some areas here just to kind of give some very light kind of textured variation to it. Started with a dark brown and then went with a lighter reddish brown on top of it just to give it a little bit of a colored variation. You can kind of see right there. That looked pretty darn good. Once that was done, it was time to add the decals. So these decals I purchased 11 years ago. Yes, you can see how long I've been waiting to work on my model. 11 years ago. These are from Blair Line, and you get a few different decal variations in a single package. And yeah, it went on really well. I was afraid because it was so old that it would not go on well at all. But you can see over the ribs of the car, it laid on very nicely. And the reason why it laid on well is because I was using micro set and micro sole heavily applied so that it would sort of soften up the decal and allow it to sort of lay over those ribs. And that was actually the very first decal I ever applied to a model. Yes, can you believe it? Very first decal. And I picked maybe the most difficult situation to lay decal on a model with all those kind of ribs, but that turned out pretty well. I ended up cutting up the decal a little bit just so those numbers kind of show up, and that the door kind of didn't get in the way on the other side. But it turned out looking very lovely, very nice. This decal over here is a nice little piece. This came from a different decal set. This is from Microscale Decals. These are really pretty decals. The resolution on these are very high quality. This one right here by Blair Line, if you take a close look at it, you can kind of see the lines there. You can kind of see the resolution of the decal. At normal viewing distance, it's fine, but it is a little bit of a lower resolution decal. These are very high resolution decals, so I really like these. And they have a lot of these little black squiggly and white squiggly kind of decals in these packages. Very nice. I highly recommend these. This decal went on very nicely, very smoothly, and looks great. That's a good looking decal. So yeah, so for my very first decals, that turned out pretty good. I also used a little bit of a thin wash of white and then either a red or a blue mix to kind of add these kind of like washed out kind of painter streaks here. You can see them in this photo here where it looks like somebody had spray painted or something was going on here, and it sort of, the rain kind of washed it away over time. I added that, not very heavy on the front, but I wanted a little bit on there just so you can kind of tell something's going on. That turned out pretty good. And once that was all done, I sealed it back up again with some Army Painter Anti-Shine varnish, and one side was done. At that point, flipped it over, went on the back side. This is what I call the B side. This side is not really seen under normal viewing conditions, so I just kind of went a little hog wild and tried a bunch of different sort of brush techniques to see what worked and what didn't. And you can see here, it does not look great. It's a little too splotchy. It's a little too heavy in spots. Yeah, I mean, I tried kind of some pitted look here. That didn't turn out very well. Went heavier on the sort of the faded paint thing that was going on there. That actually looks pretty good, but not the best looking side. But again, this is facing away from the viewer, so they're never going to see it. The roof is hard. Let me tell you, roof is hard to paint. It's tricky. If you take a look at photo reference, there's all different kinds of roofs out there. So one of my friends said you can't really ever go wrong with your roofs, and that's probably correct. I tried a couple of different things with the roof, and what I found ended up working in the end was I laid on again my burnt umber, the dark, and then the more reddish saddle brown color. And when the paint was still wet, I sprinkled on this stuff right here, which is brown iron oxide Vallejo pigments. It's like almost a weathering powder, although I think it's a little bit of a bigger pigment than a weathering powder would be. But this was, as you can see, it's very red, and it ended up making the whole roof very, very red. So once that kind of dried in place, I sprinkled off, or I tapped off all the excess, and then I went over it again in burnt umber, this darker brown, over top of that pigment. But what I did get was I got a little bit of a textured roof. You know, you see roofs of boxcars kind of being kind of rusty up and textured, and so I did get a little bit of texture there, which I think looks nice. Went over and select areas with a pretty heavy wash of this dark brown color, and that gave it kind of a wet, sort of rusty, streaky look that I think ended up looking pretty good and adding enough variation to make that roof interesting. Again, this is an old boxcar from the late 70s. It's been around for a very long time, so it's going to be very heavily weathered. Newer boxcars I don't think would look necessarily that bad, but yeah, I think the overall effect is really good. Yeah, so that's about it. The other things I did to this car, I'm standardizing my Motorroad to Cadee, the 58 series, or whatever you call this. It's the scale head couplers. I just cut the trip pins off of there and applied them to the ends of the car, so I've given this car a nice upgrade on the couplers. I added a little bit of weight on the inside. For that I used wheel weights. So it was a little under NMRA standards, and I just added enough weight to get it a little over NMRA standards, just to give it a little extra weight, which is always a good thing. And that is about it. Yeah, a really fun experience. You know, it took me a couple of afternoons to do. I'm very happy with the results for my very first car. I think it's pretty good, to be honest, and I'm excited to get started on my next one. I think that this has been a very good experience. I think it's good just to get past that blockage in my mind that's telling me, oh, you know, I'm going to screw it up. I'm never going to create anything that's good enough. Yeah, like I said, start with a car that you don't really care about, that's cheap, and a car that you want to be a very heavily weathered representation. If you go a little too far, that's fine, because it's a very heavily weathered car, right? It's supposed to look that way. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Thanks for checking out this video. I appreciate you stopping by, and check out my Instagram if you want to see my future endeavors. I'm sure I'm going to have more weathered rolling stock up there soon. And so thanks again for stopping by, and I will see you all in another video.